The question that everyone's probably already asking themselves is, "What do you want?"
Yeah.
Which is way easier to ask than answer. It's a deceptively difficult question. And it's particularly loaded too because we want many things. I wanna look like $1,000,000 and I also wanna eat ice cream, for example. Right?
Yep.
And it's the same with our careers.
Welcome to Gap to Gig, the show for dads navigating the in-between season when work, identity, and priorities start asking different questions. Here we talk about what that season looks like and how to move through it with intention. I'm your host, Michael Jacobs, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Anthony Kuo. At 17 years old, he performed at Carnegie Hall. Most musicians spend their entire lives chasing that moment, but for Anthony, it was proof he could do it. But here's the twist. He didn't actually want it. Anthony grew up with Juilliard-trained parents, elite musical training, and all the external markers of talent. He locked in scholarships, he checked the boxes, and then he walked away. He went on to graduate from NYU Stern, climbed the Fortune 500 ladder, earned the promotions, built the resume, and lived what most people would call the American dream. And still, something was missing. Today, Anthony's the founder of Untamed Career and a career satisfaction coach who helps high achievers escape what he calls the success trap, that space where you look accomplished on the outside, but feel disconnected on the inside. He helps people build careers from the inside out instead of chasing approval from the outside in. Anthony, I'm really glad you're here. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much for that great intro.
Oh, my pleasure. So you've hit some of the biggest external milestones someone could hit. Carnegie Hall, corporate promotions. You had prestige credentials. So let me start there. When did you first realize that success and satisfaction were not the same thing?
That is such a great question, and it's a really important one because it's one of the foundational things that drives my practice, which is treating success and satisfaction as separate things. And you actually had it in the intro where I had a sense of this, not a vocabulary, but a sense of this when I was young, where I was doing something that I was very good at, good enough to play at Carnegie Hall, but it was always someone else's choice that I did it. And to be clear, I do enjoy music, and I occasionally do play, and it's very different now to do it on my own terms for my own satisfaction and gratification than it was to
Right.
do it because my mom wanted me to. And there was a moment when I was preparing for my last concert, which was Carnegie Hall, which, kind of a nice way to like go out with a bang.
Sure.
Up until
Absolutely.
that point, I didn't really feel like I could stop. But the fact that I wanted to told me a lot, right?
Right.
Like I was getting on that stage and, it is gratifying to like receive applause and praise for doing something really well. And for me, it just felt really like the reason why I went through with it was because I knew I was going to get that recording and send it to colleges, and that would help my application. It would help me get scholarships, and it all worked. And it was very much an extrinsic motivation as opposed to something that I really wanted, like intrinsically for myself, where I would do it even if there was no other reason to do it.
Right. Right. It's really interesting that at such a young age, you start to get those feelings, that recognition of like, maybe this isn't where I want to be, how I want to spend my time exactly.
Mhm.
That yes, there is value in doing this, but for the long term, the big picture, is this the right fit for who I am?
Right.
Right. And so like you you clearly talk about the difference between success and satisfaction, right? Like you had success at Carnegie Hall, but you weren't, I guess you weren't satisfied, right?
Mhm.
Like it wasn't giving you that, maybe it was giving you a thrill, but it wasn't giving you that happiness, that joy that you seek in your day-to-day life.
Mhm.
And, for a lot of dads who listen to the show, they might be doing well on paper, but they don't necessarily feel great inside. How do you kind of define that gap that we're experiencing when we think, we're performing well, but it's not satisfying to us?
Well, the first thing I would say really is to cut yourself a break because this is something that we're all conditioned to do, right? From a very early age, I certainly was, right? From very early age, this is just the reinforcement that we get for the most part from parents, from society, from school, right? Like you get good grades, here's a sticker, right?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
you graduate into the workforce and you do a good job, here's more money, right? So
Right.
we are very positively reinforced for a very long time to do a good job. And what
Right.
often gets left out of the quest is the question of, did you enjoy it? Is this filling you up? Which again is a different thing. One of the things that I started to notice early on was I could chase the outcome and the outcome is great, but do I like the process of what's
Mhm.
happening, right? I might like being on stage. I might like being the center of attention, but do I like what it takes to get there on a regular basis? My mom was always on me about practicing, right? And my brother still performs and he's incredible. Like he performs with my mom. They do two piano recitals and they're still touring around the country. This is what my brother does as his side thing. Like he's also a very successful professional. But I can see that when they rehearse, they are genuinely enjoying it, right? And in order for something to be sustaining, for you to do it for a long time and for you to not burn out, you have to actually enjoy the process of it too.
Right. Right. That's a great point that it's going to pull on you if it's not something that is of interest to you, right?
Mhm.
And, we talk about burnout a lot of, you know, so easy in this day and age. We're all trying to keep up and we're trying to maintain jobs and we're trying to build our businesses. We're also trying to be good fathers and we're trying to be good husbands and we're trying to be all these things, all these different people. But if we're not doing it for the right reasons, if we're not doing it for things that recharge our batteries, make us happy, it's difficult to not burn out, right? It's you start expending a lot more energy trying to keep up with the things that you aren't necessarily that aren't recharging you,
Yeah.
right?
I really like that you brought up energy because one of the things that is really, really obvious when you pay attention to it is that it is really, really expensive, energetically speaking, to pretend to be something that you're not.
Right. Absolutely. And it's expensive in terms of the energy that you're using. That is like it's expensive to your mindset then too,
Mhm.
right? Because now you're drained, so you can't do the things that you want to do. So
Mhm.
it's pulling away your not just your energy, but your mind, your happiness, and your time.
And it's expensive to everyone around you too, right? Like,
Yeah,
you talk
absolutely.
about
Great
being
point.
a good parent, your kids feel it, your spouse feels it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like a lot of dads build their careers based on what they're good at, right? And not necessarily what they need themselves to be happy and to thrive. Why do we default to what can I do instead of what do I need?
It's a really natural instinct. I mean, first of all, like I said earlier, it's what we're reinforced to ask. And
Yeah,
so if that's something that you when you go online and look at jobs, like that's the first question you're asking, I wouldn't blame you at all because that's again, that's what we're all conditioned to ask.
right.
Uh, the other half of it is sometimes or a lot of the time when we look at jobs, we're not doing it because we want to, right? Changing jobs, making a career change of any kind is not something you do because you're happy where you're at, right?
Right. Right.
And so often there is a sense of pressure or desperation, or even if you're looking because you've lost your job and you need to find a job, right? And
Yeah.
at any given time, it's always hard to find a job. It doesn't matter if the
Right.
market's good or bad. It's always a challenge. And so then you get stuck in the scarcity mindset where you have a buyer who has options, and then there's little old you, right? And then you just have this overwhelming feeling of, well, who am I to make any kind of demand?
Right. That's a good point.
To which I say that, that may or may not be true. I can certainly acknowledge the emotional reality of that. But the reality of what you are offering is the best hours of your day, right?
Right.
Our careers occupy prime real estate. Best hours of your
Yep.
days, your best years of your life, the most productive time that you have available as a human being. And so, yes, you could fill it with a job, any job. And, if the circumstances call for it, then you're going to have to do what you're going to have to do. And if you're in a place where you can afford to think more strategically, more expansively about this, then I believe that we all deserve to get something in exchange, right? To get a return from our putting that prime real estate on the line.
Right. Right. When you can afford to do that, right? Like you can't, especially in today's day and age and with the economy that it seems to be the way that it is right now, might not be as many opportunities that are ideally fit for you in the moment, right? And so when you can afford to select the right job that brings you that joy, but sometimes we're just kind of chasing that. What's the next best thing for me, right? It's like we're chasing some sort of validation of not just the right job, but that I'm going to be good at it. And somebody's going to, as you said earlier, like you get a reward. Like in school, they give you a sticker when you when you did something well, right? And then as you grow older, maybe it's a promotion, maybe it's a corporate award, maybe it's more money. How does some of that stuff kind of from work spill over into how we show up at home?
Hmm. What an interesting question. I mean, I think it's an important perspective of the ecosystem that our careers exist in, right? Because it's really easy to let it sort of like exist in a silo of like work is work and life is life, but there is an interplay, right? You know, like we were alluding to earlier, when you're not getting your cup filled at work, then you're going to come home already drained,
Right.
which, is hard on not only you, but the people around you. And then maybe you don't get to be the dad that you want to be.
Yeah.
And on the other side, if you go to work, you might, like, if it fills your cup, you might still be tired when you get home because you've exerted yourself, but it's a different feeling of feeling well used as opposed to absolutely exhausted and drained, which puts
Right.
you in a different place of how you show up at home.
So there's like this element of satisfaction,
Mhm.
right? Is that where you're
Yeah.
at? And you get that satisfaction at work, you'll have more energy at home.
Yeah.
Otherwise, work drains you and you don't have that same energy at home. Am
And
I pulling that properly from what you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah. That's certainly part of it. And then also, um, the things that you choose to engage with at home, like the people I work with often find that the work that we do spills to other areas of their life where, once we start identifying this is the kind of work that turns you on, and this is the kind of work that turns you off, then they find that it starts to spill into, who they spend time with and what tasks around the house that they do, or it makes sense why, oh, I really like setting the laundry in motion. And that's actually a parallel to what I do at work. So I'm gonna like, you know, divvy up the like chores share to favor the kind of
Sure.
stuff that I'm really efficient at, not only because I'm good at it, but also because some part of my personality is getting activated.
Yeah. That's a great point too, that it's not a one-way street here of energy is only determined at work,
Mhm.
right? It also at home and outside of work where you get energy and energy is drained from you from what you do outside of work.
Mhm.
So it's finding that right interplay between the two that will feed the your satisfaction to the point where you can maintain a level of energy that is
Yeah.
sufficient for your happiness, your satisfaction.
Yeah. Satisfaction is ultimately a maintaining a balance of energy. I don't pretend that developing career satisfaction or even life satisfaction is all about like being on a high all the time, because that's just unrealistic and a little bit silly to chase. It's really about being aware of and consciously maneuvering what adds energy, what depletes energy, right? So
Right.
certain things are unavoidable that drain energy. For me, and I know for a lot of people, doing your taxes is not a soul affirming activity, and yet it's something we have to do, right? And
Yep. Right.
that's something that you can do where you set it up where you approach it with a sufficient buffer of energy to take care of business. And also maybe
Yep.
on the other side, have something line up for yourself to replenish your batteries.
Right. Absolutely. So let's talk about you specifically. 8 years into your corporate life, you were climbing fast. What finally made you realize that that wasn't it for you? That wasn't the right life that you wanted?
Yeah, so it was a slow burn for the entire 8 years. I knew from day one that I would eventually want to find my way out, because ultimately I knew this pretty early on. I kind of needed to work for myself. I've always had an entrepreneurial streak. I've always been running some side hustle here and there. And I just knew that about myself, but I didn't have an alternative. Like I didn't really know what I would want to do. And also all of my side hustles were only interesting enough to be side hustles. I didn't want to make them
Right.
full-time hustles. And so, similar to what I said about my upbringing with music, like there was a lot of value in being in the corporate world. I learned a lot about business. I learned a lot about navigating different personalities. So I just kind of like incubated there and just parked myself there to learn and grow in all the ways that I could, and also fill my bank account, because, the
Sure.
corporate salary is not disappointing, even though other parts of it might have been. And uh, what I noticed was that I kind of had an expiration date at any given role where, I would climb the steep learning curve, be satisfied through that, intellectually stimulated, proving myself. That was exciting. And then I would get bored. And then I would start to get like, you know, a little bit sloppy, or just start wondering about where can I go next. And then I'd make a transition. Either I'd get promoted somehow or move to a different role, either internally or move to a different company. And that happened about every 12 to 18 months until I started to hit diminishing returns, where I would
Yep.
execute a change and the timeline got shorter. It was like 12 to 15 months, and then 12 to 12 months, and then 9 to 12 months.
Yep.
But what actually kicked me out of the corporate world, like I did need a push. And for better or worse, I was good at my job. So they were never going to fire me. So, you know, there were some days where I just wished they would, and they would, put me out of my misery and make the hard decision for me. But ultimately, I'm glad that they didn't, because then it could be, again, on my terms.
Yep.
But what actually happened was I got into a minor fender bender while I was commuting home from work. Totally minor, no injuries, barely any paint chipped off of anything. And to make a very long and boring story short, the police got involved and they made things very, very difficult, and in a way that felt very, very unfair. And the car and the whole situation ended up being an emblem of what was wrong in my life. It became more of a symbol than anything, because I was reverse commuting back and forth. I lived in New York City and I was driving to suburban New Jersey for work. And the car just sort of became this lightning rod of like, this is not working. And finally, it made me admit to myself that this is not sustainable. I have to get out of this. And so it was as much an emotional decision as it was a logical one. And by that
Right.
time, I had started to coalesce around the early version of what my business is today, enough so that I could take the leap.
What I really like about what you said was that even during that time where you weren't satisfied with your job, you were still learning from it.
Mhm.
You were still taking value from it. So, like, even if you were stuck in that position, right, you still were able to mine it for things that would help you later. And it wasn't just like learning the corporate stuff, it was managing personalities, but it was also learning like what you didn't like and
Mhm.
what you did like about it. So you could figure out what works for you, right? You didn't just clock in, clock out, and not pay attention to what was going on. You paid attention to what was working for you and what wasn't, which I believe has got to have made that transition easier for you as you went from the corporate world to starting your own business. You knew, like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to focus on. These are the things I didn't like about this job. I don't want to repeat those. I don't want to get into those patterns again. So I imagine that, your preparation, well, maybe not always conscious of that preparation, that subconsciously you were setting yourself up to take that next step, right? Because you were paying attention to some of those things that we kind of take for granted every day, like our interactions with others and what we find interesting, what we don't, and cataloging those, right? You said that you were like, yeah, I was learning from these jobs, even though I would go through these phases, these cycles. I learned different things that I imagine a lot of that carried over to you as you started your own business.
100%.
I also find it fascinating that this car minor fender bender, it is unbelievable how many people have had a realization after having some sort of accident, regardless of seriousness, right? It's just like some disruptor to their normal day-to-day activity is like the thing that was like, that was the wake-up call, right?
Yeah.
You don't expect it in the moment, but then it hits, it's like, okay, I've got some new clarity.
Yeah.
And it's right.
Well, the funny thing is that it was a wake-up call, but I actually consider it more of like the third snooze on your alarm clock, because I had been clocking the signals for at least a year up to that point where I knew that I was like my time left in that world was short, but I was too scared to do something about it, and so I just sort of ignored the signals and just like, well, let me just try this other thing that I like deep down I knew it wasn't gonna work or it wasn't gonna work enough. And so
Yeah.
finally the universe had to be like, all right, here's like a real shove. And then finally I listened to that one. But I want to circle back to what you were saying earlier because this is something I tell everyone I work with, that career satisfaction is actually not a single moment, right? It's not that you get a new job in some new career or whatever and job done, mission accomplished, right? Like obviously it is an important milestone. And
Right.
career satisfaction is an active stance. It is a choice you make over and over and over again. It's situational awareness, and just as you're saying, like being aware and open to like a high bandwidth stream of information of,
Yeah.
am I enjoying this? What specifically am I enjoying? Am I not enjoying this? What specifically is not feeding me? Right? And then
Yeah.
using that information to inform your next step. And then you go to the next step and you do it all again, right? Now that I'm here, what's better? What's worse? What's the same? What do I want to change next? And you
Right.
continue that process.
Right. And that what you're describing is always evolving. Right? Like what brings you career satisfaction today is probably different than what brought you career satisfaction when you were 22,
Yes.
right? Fresh out of college. And it's probably different than what it's going to look like 5, 10 years from now,
Mhm.
right? You have to constantly be paying attention to those signals that you're getting, those experiences that you have to figure out what is bringing you satisfaction today
Yes.
and what's going to bring you satisfaction next, right? Like for most people, I imagine doing the same thing over and over for 40 years is probably not going to be very satisfying.
Right.
At some point, they're going to want to, their interests are going to shift based on the experiences that they have and what they've been exposed to and how their knowledge evolves. Right. So I'm wondering if is it accurate to say that it is always evolving, your career satisfaction?
100%. It totally is. And this is why we need to continuously pay attention, because we grow, right? We grow, we change, we evolve, life changes, our priorities shift. Or even if we're not growing, the situation around you might be growing or changing, right? Like I've had multiple situations where, in the first category, I had a client actually come back where, we got them to where they wanted to be. I hear back from them a couple years later that, hey, things are going amazing, but actually I'm a little bored now because I feel like I've tapped out on like what I can get out of this role. And now I want to explore what's next. Right. Which is a wonderful problem to have. I've also had it on the other side where someone engineers a move and it's a great environment for them and everything is wonderful. And then something happens that's out of their control, right? Like the company gets bought out by new management, or their boss leaves and is replaced with somebody who's totally not compatible, or something like that. And what do you do? Right. Now, I mean, I try to equip everyone with a like skill set that they can navigate these situations themselves. And also it is a ever continuously evolving loop.
Right. Right. And you don't know what is going to change when, right?
Mhm.
And people is probably at the center of that.
Yeah.
You get new leadership, you get a new boss, whatever it may be, or new ownership.
Yeah.
Maybe the culture changes, maybe the expectations change, and now it's not the same job that you originally were getting energy from.
Mhm.
Now it is a job that is draining your energy, or maybe it's vice versa.
I also, speaking of, this is a show that, you have a lot of dads listening here. I get a lot of people for whom having a kid changes things,
I bet.
right? It
Yep.
absolutely shifts your priorities. The things that were tolerable before all of a sudden seem like, what am I wasting my time for? I would so much rather be at home with my kid,
Right.
right? Or I used to stress so much about this and I realized that actually it's not that important.
Yep. On the flip side of that, do you get dads then who feel like they have to stay doing what they're doing because they feel they're responsible for bringing stability to the home financially or otherwise? And like, how do you navigate that process where it's like, yeah, this might not be what I want to be doing, but I'm afraid to move because I need to support my
Mhm.
family now that I have kids. Like, how do you navigate that process?
Yeah, this totally happens. And again, it's a very reasonable thing to be thinking about and worrying about. So, the first really important thing is to get an accurate situational assessment, right? I
Uh-huh.
actually partner with some financial advisors to help people get like an accurate picture of what's going on the financial front, to really understand like how much wiggle room do you have, right? Are
Yeah.
you one missed paycheck away from disaster, or do you have a buffer, right? First and
Right.
foremost. Obviously, how many earners are there in the family is a contributing factor, right? So just getting an awareness of both how things are financially speaking, and also what's going on with work. Is it tolerable and it's just like a little bit annoying? Is it awful and every single moment you spend there is just like tearing into your soul? Like there are different degrees of what's going on and how long you can tolerate the situation.
Sure.
Um, and then when we get to the what do I do next stage, where like after we've identified like what's important to you, how do you define success and satisfaction according to you and not anyone else? We then go to, okay, well, where could you possibly meet that? And that can be a very exciting, but also very intimidating stage where it's like, I want to do this, but can I really? Can I afford to do that? Is that a risk I'm willing to take? So on and so forth. Right.
Yeah.
And what I find is very, very helpful is to actually map all of the ideas you come up with against two axes. One is all about, I call it the satisfaction axis, right? Like, how interesting is this to me? Just if I could think only about this, and if money and finances and stability and whatever were no issue, how interested am I in this? Would I do it for
Yeah.
free? Right. But for better or worse, we don't live in that vacuum.
Right.
And so the other axis is about practicality. How well does this fit into my life today? Or how big an adjustment would I have to make this work, right? Would I need to go back to school? Would I need to move, etc.?
Right.
And so that you can actually imagine a 2x2 grid of this where you have, high interest and high accessibility, sort of a no-brainer, right?
Right.
And then the other no-brainer is like, if you're not interested and it's really hard to get to, then don't worry about it, right?
Right.
And then there's the other gradient. This is really interesting, but is hard to get to, or would require a significant investment or disruption in my life. And the other, that's more of like a stepping stone of like, it's not as interesting, but it provides stability.
Right.
And when you pair this framework with an accurate situational assessment, you can choose your right next step that's appropriate for where you're at.
That's really interesting, the practicality part of it, right? We usually look at like next jobs, like what I want to do next, whether it's find another job, start my own business, whatever it may be. It's easy to dream about the potential of it, but we have to also remember the practical element of it. Can I afford to do this? Can it support what I'm trying to build with my family? Can it support my interests? Right? It's like you said, there's a stability element to it. And I think, we talked about how if dads are unsure of like, they feel comfortable in their job, they're unsure about like leaving because now they have kids, they feel like they're stuck there. I think there's also a group of dads that feel trapped because they think that any career shift means blowing everything up, right? Change is hard. And right. And so going from one job to another means, throwing everything out the window and hoping for the best. How does that fit into your access then? Like, how do you help someone make meaningful changes without blowing up their lives?
That blowing things up is such a human impulse, I think. Like, I think everyone can relate to the fantasy of it. I certainly
Right.
can. When I was at my most miserable in the corporate world, the only thing I could envision as my future was to quit everything, move to New Zealand, and become a sheep farmer. It was never an actually fully baked plan. It was just, what my mind cooked up was like anything but
Right.
this, literally anything but this. I need to move to the opposite side of the world to get away from this
Right.
situation, right?
Yeah.
In reality, that would be the equivalent of like taking an entire bottle of Tylenol to get rid of a moderate headache, right?
Right.
So to continue with that analogy of like medicine, I borrow a concept from medicine, which is minimum effective dose, right? So with medicine, like if you took an entire bottle of Tylenol, you would probably end up in the ER for like severe liver problems and probably stomach problems, right? But if you only took half a pill when you have a raging migraine, it's probably not going to do anything either, right?
Right.
So the trick is to find the dosage, like a sufficient level of dosage that is actually going to give you the change that you want without tipping over into like adverse effects and side effects and things you don't want. And so it's very much the same approach that I take with change, finding the right level of change that moves the needle on how satisfied you are at work without having to blow everything up. And everyone's threshold for these things is different. It's a very individual decision that is very situationally dependent. So sometimes it could be as simple as, well, you don't even need to leave your job. You just need to advocate for yourself a little bit better with your boss. And you can completely transform how you experience your work. I've had quite a few clients do that. I've also had clients who completely shift gears. And, I'm thinking about someone who was in the film and TV world. He was a producer and like scouting location type person. Now he's a physical therapist. And that was the change that made sense for him.
Right. Right. I love how you have like an individual treatment plan for each person, right?
Mhm.
Everybody has their own experiences and they bring their own baggage or whatever you want to call it to the table,
Mhm.
right? And so for everyone, it's different. So what might look like blowing everything up to me might not look like blowing everything up to the next person,
Mhm.
right? We're going to have different perspectives on what's going to move the needle for us. And so it is highly individualized. And then when you then look at like your ambition versus the practicality of your situation and you start to compare those things, right? You can start to find the right level of change that is needed. And it's interesting to say, like, yes, you can still find satisfaction in a job that you aren't currently satisfied in, right? Not in every situation, but there are times where it's just you have to advocate for yourself. You have to look at it from a different perspective, or maybe take on a different opportunity within the same organization,
Mhm.
right? Or you find something outside of work that helps fill in some of the gaps that you're missing at work
Mhm.
to, to help you get there. A lot of it, on the surface, as you say it, it's like, that's so obvious, right? Like you should, find the thing that is right for you. You don't have to blow it up. But when we're stuck in it in day to day, like we do have some form of tunnel vision, right? We don't see all the potential outcomes. We just see what's in front of us and what we think is outside that tunnel. And we don't know.
Yeah.
Like we haven't done that whatever that next thing is for us. So it's a great reminder to to me as a dad of like, yes, I can make changes and it can be at a level that I'm comfortable with, but it will help bring me more satisfaction.
Mhm.
I can do it at my speed,
Yeah.
right? But in order to do that, I need to think through what is it that's going to make me happy and what is reasonable, what is practical, what is going to bring some stability
Mhm.
to the situation as I make this change. So really, really interesting. I'm wondering then, like, if someone listening today feels that gap between success and satisfaction, what's kind of the first question that you would ask them or they should ask themselves?
The question that everyone's probably already asking themselves is, what do you want?
Yeah.
Which is way easier to ask than answer. It's a deceptively difficult question. And it's particularly loaded too because we want many things. I want to look like $1,000,000 and I also want to eat ice cream, for example. Right?
Yep.
And it's the same with our careers. And one of the through lines that I see in almost every single client that I work with is that people are overwhelmed, right, by that question because the answer to it is a thousand things that are contradictory to each other. And I end up thinking about like, well, I want to do this, but is it practical? I also want to pay the bills. I also want to make a lot of money. I also want to like not disappoint my dad, right? Whether he's still alive or not, right? Like my internalized idea of like what will he think and what will my kids think and then it just turns into this whole morass of like, oh my god, I'm just getting overloaded and I'm just going to exit the entire system and you will
Yep.
find me eating pizza in a corner. Right.
Right.
And so before we ask anything, the very first task is actually to just organize the journey because all of the questions that are subsidiary to that, like, what do you want, are actually all really important. But what
Yeah.
happens for the most part is that they get asked at the same time, which just, you know, ends up with binging an entire pie.
Right.
So the same way that, when you're like helping your kids with like learning to do their chores, for example, like It's something that is initially overwhelming, but if you add structure and process to it, it makes the whole thing go easier and it's so much less overwhelming. So the very first thing I do is just actually orient people to like the first thing we're going to do is forget everything else. We're going to learn about what makes you tick. What actually are the conditions that make you satisfied outside of work? We don't even talk about
Yeah.
work for the first few sessions, right?
Right.
Let's talk about you as a human, as a personality, and get to understand like certain ingredients of what you need, right? Like, what are you
Yeah.
interested in? What's your style when you pursue that? And then later, we can start layering in the other questions of, okay, if that's what you want, how is that being met now? How's it not being met now?
Right.
Where could it be met better? How do you need to actually advocate for yourself?
Yeah. I like that because you're taking what on the surface, like you said, is a simple question, but ends up being this whole big morass of like impossibility that, and you end up with eating a whole pizza and then sitting in the corner by yourself, right? But you're breaking it down into smaller steps, right? You're not trying to solve all of humanity in one question, right?
Mhm.
You are taking it like, okay, it's a simple question on the surface, but it has big ramifications. And there's actually a lot of different elements to that question. In order to get to a satisfactory answer, you have to look at it from different angles, and there are different aspects of it you have to answer first,
Yep.
right? Yes, it's one question, but really it's a collection of questions,
Exactly.
right? And you don't typically, when you're taking a quiz, you're not answering all the questions at once, right? You're taking them one at a time.
Right.
Right? So I imagine it's the same thing here where it's like, okay, what do I want to do next? Well, let's break that down. First, what makes me tick, right? Then what is practical for me? Like all the different questions that you can ask, but you're not answering them all at once, right?
Exactly.
You're breaking it down into the individual units that then eventually build a full structure, right? Which then will help you be able to create that graph that you talked about earlier of the x-axis being the practicality and the y-axis being your satisfaction, and be able to figure out, where things fall on that graph for you, right? But you can't get to the end without taking the steps to get there first.
Mhm. That's very well put.
I love. Thank you. Well, I mean, it's all based on your ideas here. I'm just making sure I understand this properly. I think it's very clear, and I think that a lot of dads I talk to are like, I don't even know where to start, right? When it comes to whatever the issue may be. And oftentimes it's like, I want to be more active and present at home, but I still need to earn a living. I don't really like my job. I'd love to do something different. Or I'd love to earn more money, whatever it may be. Right? And it's like, okay, whatever that challenge is, we can break that down to smaller steps, right? As dads, we can look at, okay, what does make me tick? And part of that is spending time with my family, raising my kids, like being there for some of their activities and accomplishments. And the opposite of that, like when they fail at things and when they, learn lessons, like being there for those things also gives satisfaction. It's like, how do I build those into what else,
Mhm.
what I'm going to do with my life? Like you were giving a practical blueprint for how do you, whether it's balance or harmony, whatever, however you want to frame it, like how do you find that right fit for you between work that is satisfactory or brings meaning to you and being active and present at home and also take care of yourself,
Yeah.
right? Because I say it all the time, like if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able, you're not going to be there very long to take care of those that you care about, take care of the work that matters to you, right? There's three pillars here, and you can't neglect any one of those three. You just have to find for you where those pillars fit and where they stand. But you make it so straightforward of like, yeah, it's a loaded question. What do you want to do? But there's a practical way to do this,
Yeah.
right? And it's not overwhelming. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, right? Like you can make this something manageable.
Yes. Yes. That is, again, very well put. also a stark reminder to make sure we take care of ourselves. And a lot of that comes from my own journey with, related but unrelated topic of managing my own ADHD, right? Like, as someone like my attention can go into a million places. And one of the ways
Right.
that I've learned to manage it that I've also found very effective for the people who I work with, whether they're ADHD or not, is to break down the task into manageable chunks.
Yep. Absolutely. I love that. So I know I keep saying practical because it is,
Mhm.
but it's also empowering, right?
Yes.
Because now we're taking something that can feel overwhelming, and now you've identified a process to manage it and make it work
Mhm.
for you. Right. I love that. So we go from the serious to the completely unserious. I want to jump into our speed round. It has nothing to do with anything. 5 quick questions for you, if you're ready for them. The first question is, what's the first kids show theme song that comes to mind?
I'm gonna date myself. I'm a product of the 90s and early 2000s. The end of the show Lamb Chop. This is the song that never ends.
Wow. I think it's the first time that's been answered on this show.
Really?
Yeah. Great one, though. I mean, it's not great to remember that song because now it'll be like in my
Yeah,
head,
sorry, not
but
sorry.
no, but great answer. What was your very first job?
I was a math tutor. I was very good at math, and so I made a few extra bucks while I was in college teaching high school kids how to pass their SATs.
Awesome. Very useful. So, would you rather spend 24 hours with a toddler sized T Rex or a T Rex sized toddler?
I feel like I could contain a toddler-sized T-Rex better.
Okay. All right. What's your go to karaoke song?
Also another product of the early 2000s, I Want It That Way.
All right. Backstreet Boys, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Very well. And finally, what's the weirdest thing you've ever carried around in your bag, briefcase, or pockets?
This isn't really weird, but it happens all the time. I just find dog treats in all of my clothes pockets, like, sometimes weeks after I've, you know, last worn it.
Fair enough. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Anthony, before we wrap up, I want to give you the floor. If someone's listening right now and thinking, like, this is me, like, I'm successful, but I'm not satisfied, or maybe I'm in a tough place right now, but I want to find work that really means something to me, brings me satisfaction, kind of replenishes my battery. Where should they go? What are you building or offering that can help them take that next step?
So first off, my website, I can be reached at untamedcareer.com. And one of the things I know to be true about career dissatisfaction is that it can be a really lonely experience. I know I felt that way when I was in the depths of it, and I know a lot of people that I work with feel the same way. It's just something that you feel like you can't necessarily talk to your friends or family about because it's very loaded. There's a bit of stigma around it, especially if you're successful, right?
Yep.
I know that when I talk to my friends about it, I kind of got some version of like, dude, you have such a good job. You make so much money. What's your problem? Right. So
Yep.
they only see it from the outside, but they don't experience it from the inside. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is I've built a program that's around community, doing this as a community where you can do it with people, go through this process of figuring out what makes you tick, where can you find that, and how do you actually make that a reality, doing it with other people. And there's just a wonderful community of people who, we have collective accountability, collective momentum. There's also like a built-in network effect where, I know a lot of people get nervous about like reaching out to people,
Yep.
but it's less nerve-wracking if you're asking somebody who's in it with you.
Right.
um,
Right.
and so if that at
And they
all,
may know someone that they can introduce you to.
exactly, yeah. So if that at all sounds interesting, I have two groups, one for like senior leaders and executives, and another for people who are a little bit more like mid-career, which, typically is associated with when you start having kids.
Right. Awesome. And can they find those groups at untamedcareer.com?
They can.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes for sure. Anthony, I really appreciate this conversation. I think a lot of dads, myself included, we quietly carry this tension between providing and really feeling alive in our work, finding that thing that like really, as you said, makes us tick, right? And the way you broke down success versus satisfaction, I think gives us language to something we feel, but I think have a hard time naming. So you made it, I know I've said practical about 300 times this episode, but you make it feel not just practical, but like something that is actually doable. Like we can accomplish this. And so I'm really grateful that you came out today to chat with me, and your honesty and your clarity about this topic of finding the work that really makes you tick, brings you satisfaction, but is still going to support the life that you want to live is practical for you. So I appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Finally, before you go, if you're a dad listening to this and you find yourself in between navigating a season that feels different, head to gap2gig.com and subscribe to the Gap to Gig newsletter. It comes out every Friday. It's a quieter space to reflect on work, life, and what really matters right now. If this conversation resonated, consider sending it to another dad who might need to hear it. Until next time, I'm Michael Jacobs. Thanks for showing up and listening to Gap to Gig.